Good evening, friends. How are you? God bless you tonight, and may the Lord give you grace and bless your day, your evening, and generally your life. You know, the whole point of doing Shed Gospel is just to be an encouragement to people as best as possible in the way I can do it from my shed and with God's Word. You know, last night I was busy researching and just spending ages highlighting on the Victorian Hansard. You know, a bit of an introduction if you don't know what the Hansard is. It's a written transcript, and it goes all the way back to the first Parliament sessions back in the 1800s, you know. And it's a written transcript of the daily business of the Senate and the House of Representatives, or what you call the Legislative Assembly and Legislative Council in the States. And in finding it, in researching what was going on with the replacement of our state constitutions, just in the case of New South Wales and Victoria, what I found was a pattern between both. And I'm sure the pattern continues with certain major pieces of legislation that are life-changing. But something I think we need to pay attention to, how they're doing it is certainly in both cases with the Constitution. When they did a consolidating bill, firstly what they did was the proposal to consolidate all of the acts relating to the Constitution, you know, because obviously they're bound into the Federation with the original Constitution that they had. But what they did was they needed to get the Constitution in their control so that they didn't, they were no longer responsible to anybody. That was the thing, you know, and under the guise of a consolidating bill, to consolidate all of the loose pieces of legislation that they'd created that related to the Constitution, in consolidating that together, it seemed like a wise move to consolidate, you know, that which could be in several acts. You know, there's a benefit in consolidating things to a condensed format. You know, but in the case of where you've got a constitution that is a crucial, it's the backbone of it all. That's a completely different matter, completely different. But anyway, in the case of New South Wales, they were rushing through after Federation. They were rushing through all of these consolidating bills, and I think it was probably. It's hard to tell whether it was sort of just part of the rationale at the time, or it was actually deliberate. So why I say it could have been deliberate to consolidate the Constitution was they all know that the Constitution is the backbone document. It's by no means a light piece of legislation to tinker with even, you know. They're allowed to do alterations. But certainly talking about what happened in New South Wales was that they began to consolidate all these other acts of the New South Wales Parliament, and they put the Constitution Consolidating Bill in amongst them. So because everyone was passing all of these consolidating bills, and they were given a guarantee by the consolidating committee that was doing it, that there's no changes to the legislation, it's just a compilation of all of the previous laws that have been passed. So they had a team compiling the consolidating bills, but when they came to the Constitution, that was given sort of the same guarantee that there was no fundamental change. But therein became a lie, because there was fundamental changes, and members began, like in the stages of rushing these things through, they were happening even late at night, passing a lot of these consolidating bills. So a lot of people were tired. People were getting over the fact that consolidations were happening all the time. And so to chuck the Constitution in amongst it kind of was putting pressure on the fact that here's this bill that's been tabled and we have to deal with it because our process says that once it's tabled, then we have to deal with it. So in effect, to jam-pack, to gridlock the Parliament with all these consolidating bills, and then to chuck or other pieces of legislation that are otherwise crucial, and then to chuck a major piece of legislation in the middle. And it's a strategic move to make sure that it does get through. and this is actually happening. I'm sure this is happening many times where they're passing these huge pieces of legislation that are very impacting, but they strategically place them in the best time and place that's going to make sure it gets through. And going through Hansard, having a read of what was happening, that was the complaint, that this is a major piece of legislation. We're told that there's no changes, but yet members, in not even having enough time, they were just flicking through these things, making sure what they were signing off on. And then they're realising all these problems. And then the House gets into an uproar because some people are tired, they just want this thing to get through, and they've been given the guarantee that's good enough, and so therefore we just want to pass it through. And then these members start looking bad for objecting to dealing with such a major piece of legislation without any pause or sort of a delay, and putting it off for a few weeks to be able to read it properly. And especially if it's been some time in the development, they've had months and months or whatever to develop this thing, and then it's expected to get rushed through, jam-packed with all this other stuff, and is rushed through in a few sittings, which is very, very dangerous. And in those cases, they wanted to refer it to a special committee to actually review what's going on with this, make sure it's a bipartisan or like a multi-party affair. It's just the House of Parliament making sure that everything's okay. Aside from the fact they're breaching the Commonwealth Constitution anyway. But these members were so concerned that, it's obvious that you've got your backbone document getting jammed through something in the process, being forced through, and they're being bound by their own process even to have to pass this thing because it's been tabled. And especially if the Speaker of the House, which in the cases of New South Wales, the Speaker of the House was in collusion with Sir John C., who was the Premier at that time. They were both working together, where the Premier had tabled the Constitution Bill in New South Wales, and the Speaker was saying, banging his gavel, effectively saying, order, order, and telling the members to stop butting in and interjecting and things like that. So in the chaos that was caused was actually an advantage to these guys to pass it, because all they did was just sit there rapping the gavel and telling them order, order, and putting gag orders on people. And then basically, because these guys were gagged, they couldn't actually table an amendment or a pause. And so that on it goes, and then eventually it gets to the stages of all those who are in favour say aye. And you read it, it's a huge, it's a whole abuse of, I can see the parliamentary process there, but I think it's an abuse considering the document that they were dealing with. An absolute abuse. These guys that are here today and gone tomorrow, elected in and then they're gone, and they're jamming this stuff through. There's almost like no category. It doesn't seem to me like a category of document, like how life-changing is this document. If it's just dealing maybe like with curb and gutter or something, it doesn't have a huge effect as to the state of the nation. But the Constitution should be like I would say like a Category 1 document, which has to have a statutory amount of time of review, has to pass all of these checks before they do anything. That would be the way I would do it. But that's not the way that's been happening. And certainly even in Victoria's case, they couldn't even sideline it through when they put their constitution through. The same thing happened. Members were assured that the review committee or whatever that compiled the thing, it was the Attorney General that had tabled it. And he just wanted to get it through, and he said, it's almost all the same. Almost all the same. And then people started realising, almost all the same, what's not quite the same? And they began to suss out that something's wrong. They want to change the Constitution. They want to be able to enact it, but they realise that there's a problem still, and they can't just rush it through. And they've had experience. The older members of Parliament, they've been there many times. They realise they've been bitten on the backside many times, had the bitter end of what seems to be a small change turning out to be a major deal later on. And when a document's locked in, You know, especially, and they said the problem here is that if we pass this today and then just do what we think we're going to do by sending it to the Statutory Law Review Committee and basically pass it by Parliament and then send it over there for them to collate the changes that need to go through to the next time that we enact the changes, you know, amend this constitution. They said, well, look, we're sending it off to a body of review that aren't going to be experienced in constitutional law. So we'll just pass it today, but then we'll send it off to a body of people that aren't experienced in constitutional law, and potentially it could get gridlocked over there to where they don't actually get any seriously proposed changes to the Constitution for major issues for maybe a period of 10 years. It could be sitting over there for 10 years with the Statutory Law Review Committee. And so this is very, very, very dangerous, what's been happening in our Parliament. And the way that they're rushing these things through in like weeks or even days, like they're doing second reading and third reading on the same sitting and then passing it. And then they're even in the Hansard was showing that they were picking the opportune time where it was like almost like a couple of days before the end of the sessions for the year. So the pressure's on that with only 2 days to go, effectively, with only 2 days to go towards the end of the session, what they want to do is get the second reading done, get the third reading done, and then get it done, get it activated type thing. Then those that are proposing these bills are using time to their advantage and effectively using strategy in the House of proposing these bills and to ensure that they get through. You know, and they've had months or even years to develop these bills and put their little clauses in there and omit certain things. And that was the other thing that was raised with the Victorian one, was that I see a few changes in here, but I also see a lot of stuff that's not actually in here that was in the previous one. And it's weird to have so much stuff removed that should be in there. It's a change by removal. And that's the things that they're identifying. And so now Victoria and New South Wales, I know the other states too, but those two states particularly I've been researching, that you could see regret being set into the process straight away, and because they're realising the limitations of their process and enacting these major pieces of law, like a constitution, with only a few days to do so, but someone that's proposed the consolidating bill has spent months developing it and working out what they want to put in it. It doesn't give the opposition enough time to realise the flaws and to put enough red lights on it. And I noticed what had happened with the thing yesterday with the Conversion Practices Bill in Victoria. I noticed the pattern there of what had happened with the Constitution, where essentially it's a major piece of legislation. And Andrews is probably using time frames to his advantage, and the strategies of the House, both houses, he's using that to his advantage to make sure this gets through. And because he's got a majority, he can sort of do things. And then you see another thing that I saw with what happened here yesterday is similar pattern back to the 1970s, where they passed the Constitution, which was a major legislation then, was that the parties had already agreed before the thing went through. The parties had already agreed as to how they were going to deal with it, and that they were going to let it through, but they were going to propose amendments for later. That was the same thing that happened with Andrews, with his Conversion Practices Bill. It was the same thing that happened with the Constitution back in 1975. So they said, look, we'll just let it go through and then we'll put changes through later, or we'll try and fight it in the Legislative Council by we'll let it go through, but it has to have these amendments, rather than we'll just scrap the bill type thing, And those pre-agreements, I don't understand if they're there for good reason. But I noticed that because the heads of the political parties get together in their special meetings and pre-agree on how they're going to deal with the legislation, can be doing it to its detriment, because it's to our detriment, the people's detriment. you know, where they're pre-agreeing on their parties and doing the party line thing, that is taking the wrong view as to the scale and the impact of the legislation they're actually dealing with, you know, and that's got to be fundamentally reviewed, that and changed, that process. I think the bills that go through have to be categorized as to the level of impact that they're going to have is going to be proportionate to the level of time that must be spent on them, or something like that. You know, I would think that would be wise. But I don't think any such thing exists at the moment, which is scary. If you're, you know, looking at the weaknesses of the system, there needs to be something like that. And the other thing that I think, the potential weakness of our democratic system is that we trust and character and process some of those things there are potentially letting us down. You know, trusting people that you wouldn't trust, trusting people you don't know, trusting people with major legislation that, say, you vote someone in for a certain set of values that said they're going to put the park in town. But what else are they going to do when they're in there? How are they going to vote when they're in there? That's the thing you don't know. And you can't tell, you know, that they might sort of give you dangling carrots for electing them, but yet they could totally change their game once they get in there. They could be subjected to party dynamics that are dragging them along with the agendas that are undercurrents. And despite their best intentions even, they can be subjected to things that are, in an essence of it, actually absolutely not in our interests. You know, and it would be easy for people that are debating legislation all day. These people are just expert liars, a lot of these people. So it would be easy for them to work out, how do I go back to my electorate and tickle their fancy type thing, make them feel good about themselves, get re-elected, and then go just live that as the false life in their electorate, and then go and do their real one that they have done since school days of being a deviant or whatever, and go and do that in politics. And how easy would that be to do? And because Australians haven't taken enough interest in what's going on, and clearly even seen in Hansard that they say they're doing the will of the people, but yet they don't, or they rarely do, or they tell the people what they're going to do for them, rather than engaging the people. And their view even is toward the people, which I've seen clearly in Hansard, their view towards the people is you don't engage them on a referendum in matters that they don't understand. But their view there, I think, is kind of wrong, because if it's going to impact us, even if it is a matter we don't understand, it's their job to present it in a way that we do understand, that is accurate to the proportion and scale of what it is they're proposing, so that we can clearly say it's our will that we're going to go and do this thing. Because up till now, the predominant view has been the Houses of Parliament are sovereign, which there can't be, and that we elect them, and based on our choice of them as election, therefore all that they are doing when they're elected is the will of the people. And that's absolutely wrong. It's fundamentally wrong. But what some have argued is that, well, people wanted me or someone else in Parliament, they elected me to put me in there, so therefore I'm going to do the job for the people that elected me and just expect them to trust me, and I trust my people. But yet the same people are proposing these concepts that Parliament is sovereign, and they enjoy the disconnect between not having to be accountable to the people that they've essentially saying, well, look, you voted me, and so therefore I'm going to do the job that I'm supposed to do in there, and it is all above your heads. It's secret Parliament business. It's a black art. And we're being defrauded by these people that are two-faced. And you can see it clearly in Hansard. You go and just pick anywhere to just read, you know. Yeah, it's major. I saw things in New South Wales when they were talking in 1902, when Federation had taken place, And so this was only in maybe a year after Federation in 1901, that New South Wales was very upset, and they were devising ways to get back at the federal parliament because they were angry at the federal parliament taking work off them through the Commonwealth Constitution, effectively saying that the federal parliament is going to have jurisdiction in these matters, certain matters, and they're going to be taken off the states. And so New South Wales was faced with a situation that they're losing control, losing areas that they're having jurisdiction over. And certain members were very angry with that, and they wanted to actually get out of the Federation. And I've read it clear. And they were devising ways, they were sitting there trying to scheme ways to hold the federal government to account on constitutional issues. And they were going by the letter of the law. And it's very interesting to watch state parliaments getting upset with encroaching federal parliament on them, and the way that they revert back to the Constitution, and they will call the parliament out for overstepping its bounds, and they will very clearly do so when the state feels trodden on. But what the problem is that if the states are feeling that way towards the federal, and they're talking exactly like we do about the federal parliament stepping on the states' rights, and we're upset the state or federal's stepping on our rights, it's all the same. And we're exactly and perfectly within our right to say so, because they do that themselves. And they sit down and devise ways on trapping and tricking the government, the federal parliament, into not doing certain things, and New South Wales was scheming in ways to pull support from under the federal. This is the kind of people we're dealing with. And this is the kind of people that were still elected at the time that replaced the state constitution. Untrustworthy. And their agendas you can read very clearly that the agendas were all about themselves and having that grand position of standing in Parliament and giving the oratory speeches that they give. And then when their pride is being injured by the federal Parliament doing something they don't like or whatever, then there's a very bad reaction, and they have these sort of childish knee-jerk reactions to things. And essentially, if they didn't like something, they would create such a song and dance about it, especially when a bigger fish comes along than them, say the federal comes along and is stepping on their rights. They were very miffed about the way they're being treated. And they were very clear in saying, we're going to push back very hard, and we're going to call out the sins of the federal government, We're going to call them out on their inconsistencies and their unconstitutional behaviour. I mean, you go in there and you just type in the words Constitution in the Hansard, and you'll just see reams of mention of the Constitution. And so it's nothing wrong for us to talk about the Constitution. There's nothing wrong with holding them to account to the Constitution. There's nothing wrong with demanding our rights in the situation, because that's what they do. And I think the way that they've abused parliamentary process and not kind of graded the bills according to impact, that's a potential huge weakness of our system, And so with Andrews' conversion practices bill, it's another one that has got I think it's an ungraded approach. It could be passed through with a whole lot of things, to do with like roads and waterways and the bridges and the tunnels, and then the conversion practices bill, and then the hairdressing salon bill, and it's sort of sandwiched in all of this other stuff, and it's not given enough attention. And what happens is that because the Constitution has been replaced, and that the Constitution's somewhat in their control now, and any good bits or flaws or weaknesses of that Constitution is locked in. And that sort of helps sort of identify the need to have the general people, the general population, somewhat keeping an eye on what's happening in there. If they're supposed to be representing us, we've got to keep an eye on what they're actually doing. And if they're not representing us properly, then they don't have any, right to be doing what they're doing. But there are certain members in there that think it's their sovereign right that all they need to do is make sure they get elected, and then they just go in there and do whatever they want to do. And we've got no way of assessing their character. And give you a classic case in point. I was down at New South Wales State Parliament the other day. I went down there to go and speak. And I sat down in the cafe. And there was a very, very significant member of Parliament there. And he is in charge of a large portion of it, effectively. And he was sitting down there talking to someone else, and I was sitting there having a coffee, and he was sort of over to the side talking to someone else. And he was talking about people lying in the Parliament. And he was just having a bit of a joke with the other guy, essentially, like we all lie. And then he was holding some other guy to account for his lies, and this other guy said, "I don't tell any lies." And he said, "Well, there's a lie right there." But the whole conversation that they were joking around was telling lies. And this guy is responsible for overseeing a lot of the members of Parliament. So if he's that guy that is just having a good old joke about the amount of lies in there, I mean, he'd be one of the guys to know. But if he's talking light-hearted about telling lies, they're factoring in that we're not going to call them out for their lies. They're the only ones that can call each other out for their lies. In a sense, they're doing a black art for us. And that's where they're standing over us. Because if they're freely lying with each other, they've only just got to make us feel good, and then we vote for them. We're not doing character assessments. We can't check them out for their previous history before they stood for election. And I think this is a problem. And I don't want to introduce a concept of like vetting our members, because I think some of those things can go very badly too. But I think we have to do our homework on these people and sort of almost get a character reference from them, and go back to first principles, where the Parliament was supposed to be, people that were there to serve the country. And, so going forwards from here, I think, from what I've been finding anyway, but going forwards from here, we have a very, very dangerous organ in our states called the Parliament. It can be very good. It's got powers, whichever way it goes. It goes bad or good. It's got powers. And as I said before in the last video, because they've changed their constitution, they don't have the powers actually over us to do anything for us. They're standing out of constitutional alignment. They're constitutionally misaligned with us now, because they've swapped their state constitution, so therefore they're out of the flow of constitutional power from the Commonwealth power, And I'm sure this is happening on multiple levels. I'm sure there'd be crooked judges out there. And on that note, I was finding in, I don't know if it was the 1850s or 1870s, round about then, just reading Hansard then, it was really interesting. But somebody in New South Wales was having a complaint against these judges, and they said we need to have a character reference for these judges, because we're being let down on the personal character of the judges on the state court. These judges are having a dodgy private life, effectively. For example, one of the judges that they're having a problem with was with an underage girl, and back at that time even was a real no-no. It was like almost, it was like committing a cardinal sin, But the debate was that one of the members put forward, this is 1850s I think, one of the members put forward that we need to have a standard of quality with the judges, because we can't expect a judge to judge on the matters properly if his own private life is dodgy, you know, and he's got no character of his own self. And other members are actually opposing that because they said, well, look, it's not for us to intervene or overstep our bounds to demand a sort of like a character assessment of these judges, because essentially we're acting beyond our powers to do so. And you think, well, I can see both sides here. But the problem is that if we have a full bench full of judges that are corrupt and you know, are into all sorts of things in their own private life, their judgment is going to be skewed. And they're not going to judge rightly in matters, you know. And they're not going to have the right bias. They won't even, if they don't live, put it this way, if they don't live the truth themselves, if they don't live a truthful lifestyle to their own detriment if need be, they don't live that way with character above reproach, then how do you expect them to see with clarity in a case? How do you expect them to see the truth in the case? They might see what they want to see or what their bias shows them to see, but yet they won't be able to do everything, you know, especially if they're caught in some sort of lifestyle when people know that they've got dirt on them. The judge won't be able to make a ruling impartially in the court case because someone else behind the scenes is keeping an eye on this judge and his cases. They're going to pull him up and say, well, look, why are you judging in this case this way when we have now the blackmail information on you because we know what you're doing in your private life? And so if we have, you know, the bench full of these judges that maybe could be getting a bribe or involved in things, then the clean out of Australia needs to happen at the personal level. But with all of these people that are involved, it's like we need a move of God, like a sovereign level move from God himself, to begin to cause truth to become valuable again, to where he's able to set situations up that removes these wicked judges and puts the right ones in there, ones who don't have sort of like a bias towards something evil or have blackmail information on them. And, you know, just reading Hansard is a great thing. If you ever get the time, just get on there and just start reading. And you will spend hours and hours and hours reading, and you'll start to see that all is not well in there. They're sometimes doing what they can, but other ones are certainly strong-arming in there. And it just, I think, gives you a lot of wisdom into the system that we have that is effectively, at the moment, running the country, governing for us, you know, even if it is unlawful and treasonous. You know, understanding the system before we campaign too much for change. Maybe we should spend a bit more time just reading what they have done before and why they've done what they've done. And we can start to pick holes in it and say, look, that's not right, that's not good. And going forward from here, we need to, if we're going to be any sort of solution, we need solutions, not just campaigning. We need solutions, you know. And we need to see what's going on. And I think this whole thing with COVID, you know, the whole COVID situation, hasn't it made us all take seriously, a lot more seriously, the law? And what is law? What's just rules? And whether things are unlawful and how are they doing what they're doing? I mean, COVID has taught us all so much, and I'm, for lack of better words, thankful for this thing arising, because I've begun to see stuff that I would never pay much attention to or put much value on before. You know, I'd just be otherwise living my life trusting someone else has got my back, you know. But we know all is not well, but when it gets to this point, we still have a chance to save our country. We must do. If you loved our country, I challenge you to just ask God, is there something you can do that's going to help? You know, just start praying for one. You know, even things as they are, as wrong as they are, I think praying for the situation even just a general outcome of what you want God to do in outcome, and say, Lord, we want you to fix it. Just that is going to help. Just start praying, just something basic. And God will hear you. And but all of their meetings that they're having, if these parties are having meetings before a bill goes through and deciding how they're going to vote, don't you want God in there in his wisdom in there with them, causing them to see something that they would otherwise be blind to? Or with the judge, make him rule in a certain way that sees a wisdom there that he never saw before, that is able to begin affecting change, even using the dodginess of it all to fix itself. Wouldn't that be a miracle? And that God would bring this whole thing to a head. And but just even if we want wicked guys removed tomorrow, who are we going to replace them with? Are we going to go back to our old ways? Are you part of the answer? Just damning them isn't going to be the solution. We need to have the solution on its way. We need to have the solution in development. So whether the solution can be us in learning stuff that's able to vote properly, or to speak, or to help change the culture, to help wake our nation up to be able to vote with passion, or to speak up, or to institute change somehow at a personal level, then that's what we have to do. We have to do something. We have to say never again. We have to say we've learned our lesson, that we've allowed these traitors in by us sitting back having beers, watching the footy and not paying any attention, saying she'll be right, mate. And look at what we've gotten into. We've got a position where these guys are now almost in a position of total immunity, and we've got to get them out of there, but we have to replace them with someone, and we have to know what we're doing if we put someone else in there. We have to know what needs to be done. We have to have things tabled at a point and have process at a point where it can be fixed. Because having read what I've read, the matters are complex. They're complicated, and entrenchment is a real thing. And if people need to change their ways, they're not going to be happy about changing their ways. And why I say it's important to pray is because it's kind of like God starts giving the situation a massage, causing things to happen, weird things that they wouldn't factor in, but God does them, like, say for example, someone gets removed for a certain thing, or a court case comes up that they weren't expecting, that then reveals something else and does something else, and begins to change this. But our prayers are essential to start massaging the atmosphere around this situation. You can be sure that the enemy, Satan, wants to turn the parliament into a weapon against us. It's a contested place. It's a battleground. You have the opposition fighting, debating, arguing over things. It's supposed to be able to come to a wisdom, de-escalate enough or it wears itself down until you get the wisdom come out. But if it's just debate and arguing, and bills are being rushed through and there's no wisdom with anything, then it's a problem. And we have to begin praying and begin to say we're going to take this country back. We're not going to sit here anymore on our backsides. We're not going to abdicate from our job. We're not going to be brought into slavery by someone we've elected. Someone in delegated authority. And it's got to begin a fundamental change. All of this has got to begin a fundamental change with us. And if you feel ill-equipped, I just feel ill-equipped myself. But I just began to pray, and I think if you've been watching Shed Gospel for about a year now, you'll remember that I had a prayer list in my top pocket in my in here. I was praying. One of my prayer points was, I wrote a prayer list out because I didn't want to forget the points that I was praying. But one of the things I was praying was that the Lord would protect, the foundations of this nation. This nation's foundations would be saved from those who wish to take them out. Talking foundations being saved, since that time, in an answer to my prayer, I've come across Wayne Glue and Juliana and others that are talking about the Constitution. And so I bought a constitution, talking about saving the foundations. I mean, I'm now in a position that if I want my prayers to come to pass, that I'm praying about the foundations being saved, then I've got to do something about it my own self when it presents itself. You know, if I'm the answer to my own prayers, I can't rule that out, you know. So I'm praying for the foundations of our country to be saved. And so I wrote even that ebook that you can download, my ebook now, that's goes back into the law foundations of our country, back to England, to our Christian law foundations. And if I'm talking about praying that the foundations of our nation would be saved, me writing an ebook that everyone can download from Shed Gospel and share amongst their friends is part of the answer. I mean, it's not rocket science, but here's the thing: if something is in your hand to be able to do and to use for God's glory, for His kingdom's sake, and for saving the nation of Australia, and for saving the potential future for the next few hundred years of living here. I mean, tyranny is always there. And that's the thing. I think people need to grow up and realise that tyranny is sort of in the Bible, isn't it? Tyranny is essentially always there. You've always got an enemy. You've always got someone that hates your guts. You've always got an enemy plotting against you. You've always got someone trying to depopulate the world. Always. That's just the system. It's always the bad guy, the villain, you know. And but just because there's a villain doesn't mean that we sit back on our backsides and say, well, that's it, game over. You know, part of the strategy of making sure the villain can't do his thing is us doing our bit. That is the right thing to do. And so if you're interested in the foundations of our country, and if you're interested in the freedoms you enjoy staying available for the years to come, you personally are going to have to do something, Aussie. You're going to have to know something. You're going to have to stand up for yourself, because no one else is going to stand up for you. And, you know, stand up in your strengths, that you assert your authority that you stand in. I mean, they need your authority for them to represent you in the parliament. So stand up in the authority that you have to hold them to account. You know, you can't, if you delegate the job and the job's not being done, you go back and chase it up. That's the way it is. That's the system. But if you're just going to sit back and say, well, they should be doing a good job, and you sit there whinging at the news, then you're not fulfilling your job, your constitutional job of holding them to account. You know, so if you want our nation to be saved, you don't sit there raving at the news. You start educating others. You start saying where the truth is. You start finding the truth out. You start holding these guys to account. That's what you can do. And that's part of the answer. And, you know, talking about the Hansard, you will find so many gems in there. You'll find stuff, that's interesting, you know. And then they're talking about, say, Newcastle Waterworks or something like that. You're like, oh, I didn't even know there was something there they're talking about, you know. You go back and start finding these things out. It's like you start getting a sense of, I'm finding who I am as an Aussie. You know, reading the debates, reading some of the great speeches that were given, some of the great viewpoints. And you can start to adopt it in your own life and go, well, look, if they were, some of these guys were statesman leaders, you know. Some of the other guys were rubbish. But the statesman leaders, you can sort of start to think, well, I want to be one. I want to be modelled after one of these guys that was standing up for good things. And back then, back in the 1850s, they had a growing secular movement. They had people that wanted to, you know, shut down the churches, people that wanted to ban the Bibles, and all that stuff back then. In the Age of Enlightenment, in the 1800s, they were saying, oh, we're past Christianity now. I mean, we're now 100 years, 150 years after that, and the same things are going on. So that's what I'm saying. We've always got the villain. We've always got the thing that the villain's about to do. We've always got the foreboding, rah, 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 we're coming after you. That's always there. And we look at the past with rose-coloured glasses. But when you go back to the Hansard, you'll realise those days were just as bad as these days, just different things. And somewhat, I mean, you can't be filled with fear looking at the past. But here's the thing. If you took like I say, eat the meat and spit out the bones, if you take the best bits of the past and you find something there in the past that was good, that needs to be saved and preserved, then you have an obligation to make sure that that does get saved. If it's something that pulls at your heartstrings of a value that is going to be for our welfare, that is being corroded or taken away now, but even in times past when they were trying to do it, if you can find something there and how that was derailed then, you'll then start getting some confidence that you can derail something coming up in the future. You can be part of the answer. You have to make some noise. You have to speak up. We have a representative government, I mean, the other part about it is us making enough noise to make them do what we want them to do. They're in there to do what we want them to do. And if they've got these narrow time slots with major bills, we're going to have some snap decision wisdom. We're going to have the right guys in there saying and doing the right things on our behalf while we're busy working doing something else. When they're in there debating something, we have no idea what they're doing. We need to have a trust and action that we're trusting them that they're doing the right thing, but we're trusting that God's outcome is going to happen in there because we're praying about it. And that somehow God would turn their counsel, whatever they're counseling to do, that God would turn that around to be his counsel. Even if it is going down a foolish path for a while to do another outcome that God wants done, because these guys are so used to opposition, in a sense, give them enough rope and they'll hang themselves, in their technique, And talking about God's wisdom in all of this, you go back to the Bible and you start seeing there's a real need for wisdom. There's a real need for standing up. There's a real need for people standing in the gates. Like in the Old Testament, they said about the children of the wise man that fears the Lord, that his children would not be ashamed, but would speak with the enemies in the gate, would subdue, in the margin says, would subdue or destroy the enemies in the gate. Back in those days when you had walled cities, gatekeeping was such a big thing, making sure that the enemy can't come in. The same thing, the Parliament and any of these other open things, you can have an enemy coming in from the front or from the side or from the back in the gate of it, like in the symbolic gate of it, like in the gates of the culture or in the gates of the laws, where you get the wrong guy in there and with too much powers. It's effectively you've let an enemy in the gate. And the Bible says there's a promise there that if you're a man or woman that fears the Lord and you have children, your children can be those ones that speak up and stand up and subdue these enemies in the gate and speak against what they're doing. And since I found that verse, I've realised that God's promise to my father, my mother, my grandparents is being fulfilled through me. If I've been down to speak at Parliament and tell them the things that are on my mind about what's going on, and I've spoken very strongly to them, I didn't hold back anything. I was not afraid, even though I was shaking, because I had to say what I had to say. It was just a narrow window of time for me to say the exact thing I needed to say, and to say it without compromise, without fear of what they're going to say to me. I did it, shaking in my boots, but I did it. So it is on the record. It's on official transcript of the thing I said. And God was there with me, strengthening me to do that. And before I went in, I had my Bible, and when I went in, I swore the oath that I'm going to tell the truth. I had my hand on my Bible in there with me, and I had my red Constitution in there with me in that meeting, and I had my evidence in there with me. And I felt confident that if my forefathers have gone on before and set the foundations of this nation, then I have to say something. That if it's not right with the foundations, I have to say something, because I could represent 100,000 people to them. One person's voice in some of these meetings you can go to in there, the way that they view a member of the public speaking, they don't know whether the rest of the public think the same way I do, because I could be speaking for millions, and if I'm the only one speaking to them from the public, they might view that the public thinks this way, and they would have to take my advice as proportionate to the population. So being involved or saying something important is essential. And speaking up, you can represent thousands. You know, like they talk about customer reviews on like the websites and stuff, you know, different services, that the customer reviews, say like 3 customer reviews might represent 3,000 customers to them. The opinions of 3,000 customers. And, you know, so speaking up, and if everybody spoke up, I mean, if 1,000 people spoke up about an issue and were ringing their members of parliament, making a nuisance out of themselves and complaining about something, then if one person was viewed as 1,000, but if 1,000 people were ringing, that would be effectively 1 million people in their mind that's speaking up about the issue. So we have to do something. I mean, if it's just ones or twos, like if it's just me ringing my local MP, like I could represent, I don't know, the whole Hunter Valley to him if no one has spoken up on something. What if you rang your MP? What if you just dared to step out of the boat, you know, type thing, and just got out of your comfort zone and just asked God for some boldness to do the right thing by our forefathers that built this nation, you know, to save it. So, you know, and going back to read the Hansard and the transcripts, there's a great starting place. You'll spend hours in just really, really interesting reading. It's really great reading. And it's just a real patriotism that you can get from reading it, you know. And you just realise, oh man, the same techniques, they're using all these same techniques. It's like a big broken record. It goes around and round. And you realise the whole thing's a big game, you know. But in just reading it in interest's sake, you don't know what you're going to pick up for later. If you're talking with one of your friends, and you say, well, I've seen they did this thing back in the 70s, it was like that. You're like, oh, really? What, you pay attention? Well, I was just reading the Hansard. It was just interesting, and I don't know, stuck out in my mind that happened. It was kind of weird. But, you know, at what point are we going to become patriotic? You know, our nation needs patriots. Our nation was built by patriots. It was not built by conniving snivellers, you know, and those that are set there for our taxation. It was not built by them. It was built by patriots and men and women who had vision and backbone and guts and some intestinal fortitude, as they say, you know, and people that knew their rights, that weren't going to be trampled on. And men and women that, you know, churchmen and women that stood up for values of the Bible. You know, if you want to talk about patriotism, there's nothing more patriotic than standing up for the values of the Almighty God and us as His creation, and that He loves us and that He's on our side, and this earth is given to us, so we just have to do with it as we see best to do from Him. Then there's a growing patriotism you can get, you know, and just ask God for some help, because He is interested in nations. He's not trying to make the whole world one faceless group. He's interested in individuals. He's interested in nations. And God told Abraham, didn't He? He said that he would be the father of many nations. He didn't say that he would be the father of, see, because originally he was called father of multitude. Abraham was a father of a multitude. And from multitude, you can draw the clear mental picture that multitude could be just the same race or the same nation. A multitude could be just one nation. But then when God called him Abraham, He called him father of many nations. And in effect, He compounded the effect that Abraham would have. And so for that reason, all of the things about like the agenda, Black Lives Matter agendas and socialist agendas and communistic values and all these things that try and strip you of your identity, your individualism, and nations having a sense of strength about them, you can see that they're actually from the enemy, Satan, and they're an agenda. It's always a creeping agenda that tries to come in that has to be kicked out every time. Back in the Hansard, I found in New South Wales, they're talking about the socialist movement. And how the socialist movement was a threat. This is probably back in the 1920s. The socialist movement was perceived as a real threat and trying to take over everything. And so, you know, we've got the same enemies these days. And if they're no one new, then we thank God they're just like on a merry-go-round. You know, if it's not the socialists, then it's someone else's. Well, it's just someone else's. But it's about time that we took God's word seriously and took our rightful place, our nation-changing place, where our nation is the sum total of the whole, sum total of all of the wonderful people that live here that are doing a good job. Then we can go forward and stop being ashamed of ourselves, stop being ashamed of our heritage, stop being ashamed of our skin colour, stop being ashamed about any of those things, and stop being silenced, stop apologising for being ourselves or having an opinion. You know, you're not going to silence me. They're not going to silence me. I know too much. And praise God. And that's the way it is. So God bless you, friends. May you be encouraged, and just take out of these videos what you will. Just to, even, I hope, just an encouragement that if you want to get up and do something for our nation, just get going. Ask God to help you, and you'll be amongst friends. God bless you, friends. See you later. Bye.